Hello everyone, Ruby Ravel here, an earthy warrior swimming against the thrashing currents of the wine dark sea, in search of the mysterious ocean that encircles the farthest peripheries of the world. Here to talk to you today about Mars in opposition to Neptune. Now, oppositions describe aspects in which planets are separated from one another by 180 degrees. They are literally opposite one another on completely polarized parts of the sky. They are as far away from one another as possible, and yet united by an invisible cord. In the natal chart, or by transit and progression, opposites often describe parts of ourselves that feel divided and contradictory, where we have impulses, attributes, or yearnings, desires, parts of our character that feel like they are pulling us in different directions that are mutually exclusive. They cannot be easily combined. They resist one another. Not only that, they often have an antagonistic love-hate relationship with one another as well. Now, as I explored in my previous video, when there are oppositions between Virgo and Pisces, it often represents a tug of war between order and chaos, between total self-control and utter self-abandonment, between sober rationality and divine madness and intoxication. It is the total encapsulation of a separate bodily finite self versus the oceanic immortality of a boundless spirit that communes in a state of oneness with everything else. Now, because the rational mind is dualistic by nature, having a tendency to divide reality into either ors, into on or off, into this or that, it struggles to believe that opposites could exist simultaneously. So when we apprehend that we have opposed parts within ourselves that seem to be mutually exclusive, that seem to be at war, that seem to be irreconcilable with one another, the easiest way we can deal with that schism within the self is to simply pick a side and deny that the other exists, and then project that side onto everyone else so that they can live out an energy within us without us having to take responsibility or accountability for what we have denied in our own spirits. When you have an opposition between Mars in Virgo and Neptune in Pisces, you have a schism between two very different characters. Mars in Virgo is the athletic scholar warrior who feels most powerful when he feels that he has attained total mastery over his mind and his body, who wants a sense of order, form, structure, and control, who likes to feel that they are a distinct, separate individual who is sufficient totally unto themselves. Whereas Neptune in Pisces is a mad, visionary mystic who conversely wants to surrender all power, all desire, all self-control and worldly ambition so that it can experience total immersion and unity with cosmos, with the Godhead, whatever word you want to label for the boundless beyond and the unknowable infinite, that dark watery womb from which we came and to which we return. That is what Neptune is seeking, a loss of all boundaries so that we can experience the euphoria and terror of being immersed in everything, rather the pain, loneliness and claustrophobia of being a single, tiny, small being isolated from everything else. So to demonstrate how an opposition between these two planets work, let's imagine a scenario where someone has made the choice, whether conscious or unconscious, to choose one planet and to totally deny any personal accountability or ownership for the other polarity. So let's say we choose someone who's very earthy, who identifies with their Mars in Virgo and refuses to believe there is anything Neptunian, Piscean, spiritual, new agey or woolly-headed about them whatsoever. They believe themselves to be a powerful, practical person, someone who is ruled by their mind and their senses and by logical, pragmatic considerations. This is someone who feels powerful when they feel like they have their shit together, when everything is neatly planned and prepared and ordered and scheduled. Everything that is to do with them, with their minds and their bodies and their immediate environment, their work and their finances, they like to feel it is all under their control, under their suzerainty, that they have attained mastery over it. And if they haven't, then they are always working towards that goal. These are people who have their days neatly scheduled from beginning to last, so that every last moment is milked for its potential to be time that is well used. Because someone who believes solely in the earthy, in the material, in the finite nature of bodily incarnation, and denies the watery and the spiritual, will necessarily refuse to believe there is an afterlife. It will refuse to believe in religion, in spirituality, in mysticism, to believe that there is a life beyond this one, and to believe there is any true pleasure or enjoyment that doesn't derive ultimately from one's body and one's senses. And if you are operating from the idea that you live once in a single body and then you die forevermore, then time is going to be very important to you. You will not waste a moment of it because you know that one day you will die and you won't be able to do any more. So you want all of that time, all of that power, all of that energy to be constantly put to what you believe to be good use, whether it means serving yourself and your own sense of improvement or using that energy to serve and help and support other people. So let's just take a moment to imagine the kind of lifestyle, the idealized lifestyle that Mars in Virgo would like to construct for itself so that it feels powerful and confident. Like I said, because it believes that life and consciousness ends with the body, because it believes that consciousness arises from the body rather than the other way around, it wants to take care of its body and its health, because if it looks after those things, the chances it has of prolonging its life, prolonging the time it gets to exist in its body and be conscious is going to be very important. So Mars in Virgo might be the type of person who gets up at 5 or 6, goes for a jog, comes back, has a nice healthy bowl of granola after they've taken all their multivitamins and supplements, of course, has a designated slot through which they work rigorously and thoroughly throughout the day. When they have finished working later, they still have more free time on their hands. So they think, okay, well, I also want to use that time optimally. I don't want to sit around on my ass. I don't want to waste time. You know, I can do that when I'm dead, which I'm going to try and stave off for as long as possible. So maybe in the evening they'll read an improving book, or they'll go to an extracurricular class, or they'll have a night job that they moonlight in the evening so they can keep on supplementing their income so that they are more dependent on themselves. They are more self-sufficient. Now, if that's what makes Mars in Virgo feel good, you are going to feel very threatened by anything that could disrupt that sense of self-contained power. And for Mars in Virgo opposite Neptune in Pisces, that threat comes from the mystical, irrational, emotional, uncontrolled world of Neptune in Pisces. So let's say you are being this good Mars in Virgo person. You've got up early as you planned, you've gone for the jog, you've had your breakfast, and then suddenly midway through that you have developed a migraine, or you've received a message that has left you so emotionally overwrought that you no longer feel that you can carry on with the structure that you have created for yourself. This automatically creates tension between a part of you that's saying you need to honor your emotional needs, versus the part that wants to suppress all emotional needs, wants to suppress all of the impracticalities and improbabilities of one's inner life so that one's outer practical life can be dealt with more sufficiently. When a planet is frightened of becoming its opposite, it feels the only way it can stave off those energies that it refuses to believe exist in itself is by exaggerating or becoming even more extreme in the expression and behavior of the planet that it has chosen to identify with. It rebels against the possibility of the other planet. It loathes it, it hates it, it fights it off tooth and claw, and also will then project that hatred onto anyone who embodies or is perceived to embody the qualities and nature of the opposite planet. So at its most extreme, Mars in Virgo might completely shut out its emotions, might completely turn off its inner life, might refuse even to engage with anything that is imaginative, because it finds depictions of things that aren't purely material and logical threatening to its experience of the world. It has to reduce everything back to being a biological function, and will happily chop off anything that it feels as threatening its self-sufficiency, that feeling that it needs only itself and no one and nothing else, that it can live as this totally contained hermit who does everything for themselves and never needs to ask anyone else for anything. It hates the idea of ever being weak or dependent on someone else, or of losing control over its mind, body, and emotions. And because it's afraid of those things, it will damn well make sure that no one ever perceives it as ever losing control in all of these areas. And whenever it has a moment when it does feel sensible or vulnerable or impressionable, it may respond to that by even more exaggeratingly making itself appear like it is definitely in control, and there's nothing that you need to worry about going on behind the curtain here, folks. If someone succeeds in carrying on this extreme Mars in Virgo behavior for long enough, they may even do it so well, so thoroughly, so effectively, that they finally convince themselves they've won, that they have succeeded in totally chopping off and eradicating and uprooting any part of them that may have been even vaguely Neptunian, and it's been extirpated from them. They have cut it out of themselves like a loathsome, unwanted tumor. They may truly believe that they are someone who is perfect, who has developed total mastery over the mind and the body, and who may set themselves up as some all-knowing guru of fitness and health and grounded, self-sufficient psychology. And yet, the problem with extremes is that they are always unsustainable. You know, we talk about the law of balance, of karma, of homeostasis within the body, of the psychological principle of enantiodroma. And all of these things state that if something is taken to its most extreme limits, the only way it can bring itself back into balance is by going the other way to as great an extreme. You know, when a seesaw goes down, one end has to come up. And when the other end goes down, the end that was formerly down has to go up. So there is an immutable psychic and physical law behind the movement of all of these alchemical energies. So it may feel just when Mars in Virgo has reached this point of absolute separation from Neptune, that suddenly Neptune starts to creep in. And the way it usually creeps in is either through the guise of other people or outer events. If you are this workaholic Virgoan person who's always switched on, who's always in control, and who's always highly strung because they refuse to ever let themselves rest, because they equate rest with failure, with death, with being weak and unproductive, eventually you're going to make yourself sick from just pushing yourself too far, from being in control so much, because you fail to recognize that letting go, resting, being sick, losing control, letting other people look after you, or disappearing into the inner world of dreams and emotions and imagination is just as vital and important and healthy a part of the human spirit and experience as is its opposite. And if you have denied to accept the opposite on its own terms, then it will come along and it will seek you out by an act of fate. So let's imagine the relationship angle of this first. So, like I said, the Mars in Virgo person has a problem with people who are Neptunian, who are Piscean, who are watery. When it meets these people who are mystical and spiritual, who claim to be visionaries, who are these mad artists who don't sleep or eat for 5 days at a time, and yet paint these beautiful technicolor masterpieces, who claim to be in contact with beings from other worlds, or who might just be people who have messy, indulgent lifestyles where they're just constantly going to festivals, constantly going out to bars, getting high, getting drunk, just surrendering all responsibility for their body so that it can experience moments of euphoria, release and abandon. When Mars in Virgo encounters these people, one part of him feels revulsion because they represent the everything that he is aspiring not to be. And yet part of him also envies these people at the same time, because he can see that in their wild, untutored, abandoned, totally unconscious behavior, they are experiencing something that he is not. They are able to open doors that he has nailed shut and tried to fill in with a cement mixer. Because they are so other, yes, they are repulsive, but they also seem glamorous. They seem otherworldly, they seem enigmatic and mysterious. They seem to be made of what dreams are composed of, whilst he feels like this being who is 100% of the earth. He almost wants to possess these beings. And so even though he hates and looks down on people who live these madcap, spiritual or messy drug-fueled lifestyles, he's also just unbearably aroused and attracted to these people as well. Time after time, when he meets other Virgoan people, when he's at the gym or when he's at some kind of fitness class, those people, for some reason, even though they reflect all of his values, they seem to cancel him out because they're both playing the same note at the same time. They're occupying the same territory. They're more likely to compete with one another rather than to be set off or excited by one another. Yet when he sees these mad mystics, he falls in love with them. He feels enchanted by them. He feels enraptured with them. He wants to experience their magic through the lens of loving them. One of the really funny things about these oppositions is that if we have truly, totally 100% refused to believe that the other planet exists in us at all, then we become determined to project it onto everyone else, regardless of whether or not it is there in reality. Because we don't want to find it in ourselves, we almost have to find it in everyone else that we become close or intimate with, just to make ourselves feel better and to achieve some kind of warped psychic balance. So yes, many times the Mars in Virgo person might be attracted to strongly Neptunian people, but sometimes he'll become attracted to people who aren't Neptunian at all, and yet he will still see them through that lens. And that person may find having that projection on them so unconsciously powerful that they start acting in a more Neptunian way because that is what is expected of them by this other person. So let's say the Mars in Virgo person actually does date one of these other very Virgo and healthy, fit, self-controlled people that he meets down the gym. And he dates this person, but stops seeing them like that. Instead, he does start to see them as being someone who is maybe a bit more magical and otherworldly and emotional and irrational and imaginative and dreamy, but also perhaps a bit silly and dependent and needy and, not in control of themselves. And they start describing these things to the other person. This is the thing I can't control. I'm pet sitting at the moment. And this pet needs my constant attention. So he starts describing to his partner, telling them that they possess these Neptunian characteristics that they don't actually possess. And after a while, initially that person might feel some cognitive dissonance. They might say, well, no, I'm not actually those things any more than you are. In fact, I can see you possess quite a lot of those qualities yourself. You just don't own up to them. And you get very angry and aggressive or moody or withdrawn if or anyone points them out. But after a while, that partner gets so accustomed to having all these Neptunian traits projected onto them that they do start to behave that way, that they do start to become all of those things that they originally denied. Because if we love someone, we trust someone, and if someone that we love and trust and are open and receptive and vulnerable to tells us something untrue enough times, we start to believe it and we start to become it, because on some subconscious level we understand that the relationship can only function if we fully take on the role of this opposite that that person has denied. So sometimes the Mars Virgo person with that Neptune opposition may actually like to set themselves up as some kind of great rescuing Prince Charming, this person who deliberately goes and seeks out people who are unstructured and weak and sick or messy and deranged and helpless. And he says, I am everything that you are not. I am controlled, I am focused, I am healthy, I am structured. I have come along to look after you and to train you in my ways, to fulfill you by being all that you cannot be for yourself. Now, a lot of people in modern lingo might define having someone speak to you or perceive you in that way as being a form of gaslighting, that very popular modern word. Or they might see it as deliberate manipulation or brainwashing. Sometimes it can be, but there are some times when a person genuinely is so completely pig-headedly unconscious of a certain side of themselves that they do believe you are truly these things. They're not choosing to manipulate you, they're not choosing to brainwash you, not choosing to have this projection, but they are so controlled by it that they can't see anything else but it. It's one of the crazy things about repression, is that the more we repress something, the more it simultaneously becomes almost the sole lens through which we perceive the world. It's like we're trying so hard not to look at it that we can't see anything else but it at the same time. But, whether someone is doing that deliberately or whether they are doing it unconsciously, the pain that can come from having those projected on you is just as extreme and dangerous either way. So that's the relationship way of coping with an opposition. The other one is to simply vacillate between extremes. I've known some people who have these tense Virgo oppositions where the only way their inner life and spiritual life, which they have denied existed, can reach them is through illness and sickness. They can be these people who do manage to live successfully and in a rigidly work-driven way for long, long periods of time, And yet periodically, every now and then, they will have some great big health crisis that will make it impossible for them to work and carry on as they are. You know, they might have a really good streak, and then suddenly they have this horrible incapacitating migraine that leaves them bedridden for several days. Or again, they have a good streak, and then what do you know, that mysterious diagnosis, irritable bowel syndrome, comes along, and they're stuck on the toilet for a month, you know. Or in more extreme cases, if someone has lived rigidly in that mode for years, then the only way that denied Neptune may be able to express itself is through something really extreme. You know, they might have fibromyalgia or ME or just some kind of condition that produces such a great level of bodily fatigue and exhaustion that they can simply no longer afford to live in that rigidly Virgoan way anymore. It's almost like the body is saying, okay, if you're not going to rest, if you're not going to surrender, if you're not going to let go, if you're not going to take time to acknowledge the importance of your inner life, I'm going to sabotage you so that you have absolutely no choice. So there is no possibility for you to resist because fate has taken things into its own hands. And then when they are there, you know, sick or unable to work, unable to just carry on with this obsessive need for self-control, then things start to seep in and they say, oh, okay, maybe there is something to this spiritual, introspective, inner part of life that I've judged people for in the past, but can actually see now has some kind of relevance. And if they take that on board and do develop their inner life and their spiritual life, they may find that over time they are able to achieve wholeness. However, like I said, if we've denied something extremely, once we finally do accept it, we can sometimes go completely the opposite way. That person who has lived in this rigid Virgoan life where they are very critical, where they are very cynical, where they're always very analytical and a bit skeptical and always having to take things apart and research them obsessively before they believe or refuse to or accept there's any kind of validity to something. Once they've reached that Neptunian other side, they may feel, oh, okay, I'm just going to throw myself into things now. I'm going to stop all of this mental obfuscation, this way of detaching myself from the rest of the outer world and just throw myself into the outer world, throw myself into occultism, into spirituality, into magic, into esoterica, into meditation, into psilocybin and LSD. It wants to get as far away from that Virgoan world as possible because it has felt so restrained and claustrophobically restricted by it. If we become too Virgoan, if we believe too much that our minds and bodies are the only reality, then those minds and bodies start to feel like a straitjacket. They start to feel like this overly tight catsuit that is digging into us at all times and making it hard for us to breathe, making it hard for us ever just to rest and relax and let go. So when we reach that point where we finally let go, it's almost like we want to say, goodbye body, goodbye mind, I'm going to strip you off, I'm going to cut you all to pieces, and I'm going to live like all of those mad, crazy, mystical people that I've judged all these years. I'm going to stop thinking and planning and analysing and just let myself surrender to my feelings, to the flow of wherever fate and the divine wants to take me. I'm going to dive into that river and into that ocean and allow myself to be a creature of its currents, to be the tutor of its tides, to forget about time, to forget about form, to forget about structure and experience the euphoria and the wonder and delight of letting go and feeling that warmth and oneness with everyone and everything. However, after a while of living like this, of living this life of spiritual extremes, of denying all routine, of denying any needs of the body or of practical, material, financial reality and focusing entirely on what my spirit needs, my soul needs, ironically, this person may find themselves back in exactly the same situation. They may neglect their body and their material world so much that they make themselves sick again because they have forgotten to eat, or they've spent 5 months only eating the same thing or having 1 grain of rice a day because they're too busy meditating or taking drugs or getting lost in their fantasies and imagination. They've been so busy leaving this lifestyle that they've forgotten to look after anything else. They've forgotten to pay the bills. They haven't bothered to get a job, and all of that's been fine until suddenly they find themselves in a position where actually having those things would be really damn useful. So if we give in to the pull of extremes of either side, we eventually destroy ourselves in some way. And we begin to say, oh, actually, now that I have gone to that Neptunian extreme, I can see the validity of that Virgoan side. But having been to both extremes, I now realize I can't keep yo-yoing like this. I need to find that inner balance. I need to make time for both control and for the loss of control, for sobriety and for intoxication, for practical reality and the wilderness of the imagination, for my outer life and my inner life. I need to honor both of those gods rather than just sacrificing to one and saying fuck you to the other. And some people never actually reach this inner state of synthesis. I know some people who still will go through these cycles of being either extremely one or the other. I knew one person who they would go through these periods where they would be very structured, they'd be very sensible and serious, they'd hold down a steady job, they'd look after themselves, they'd keep their flat clean, they'd be a good parent to their children, their life would be orderly, they wouldn't be reckless, they'd be very careful and cautious. And then eventually that would get too much and they'd throw it to the wind and they'd go through periods of basically just going on never-ending benders and being drunk all the time and just letting everything descend into chaos and letting their emotions spill out with volatility in all directions. They didn't seem to be able to reach that middle point because there was still that denial when one was in possession of the other god, of the validity of the other. Somehow honouring two masters can sometimes make us feel like there is a chain attached to one part of us and a chain attached to the other part of us, and we're being pulled in both directions in a way that produces tension but also definition at the same time. It's not an easy thing to do, and I also talk about these things from experience, because even if you don't have an opposition natally, you can still experience them by transit. So, for instance, Neptune has been transiting through Pisces for at least a decade now. I'd have to go and check the ephemeris tables to let you know when that transit began. But it means that anyone who does have planets in Virgo will have at some point experienced Neptune in opposition to those natal planets, pulling them in a direction that is in some way an antithesis of how they perceive and experience themselves. And because I have Sun and Mercury in Virgo, as some of you are aware, when Neptune opposed my Sun and later on when Neptune opposed my Mercury, that was very much what happened. I had reached this point where my life was too rigidly Virgo and earthy and practical and disciplined and self-controlled, to the point where, well, you've got to think about Earth. Earth is the material world out there. It's nature. It is the soil from which things grow. But if there's no water from the sky, if there's no river, if there's no oceans, that Earth turns into a wasteland, as described by T.S. Eliot. It turns into a desert in which, yes, there is the stable ground of the earth, but it's all dried and arid and cracked. There's no flowers there that make the natural world beautiful and bountiful and full of life. And we can be the same alchemically if we stick too rigidly to the earthy sides of us. That life can lack the colour of flowers, which are irrational and which yet bring so much beauty and joy into our lives. And I did exactly this. When I reached that point of being peak responsible, self-contained, disciplined Virgo, always projecting Neptune onto everyone else, I reached this point where living that way was making me desperately unhappy and desperately sick, where my life was everything that I had never wanted it to be. And I ended up quitting my job and ending the relationship I was in at the time, and I started asking myself, what is it that I'm lacking? Because apparently I'm doing all the things that material society tells you should be doing, and the answer revealed itself to me, as it often does once you start asking the question, that there was a spiritual void in my life that I had once felt the need for a long time ago, but had learned to repress. And so I did the opposite. I gave up that life that was no longer pleasing me, and I dedicated years to the study of spirituality. And I developed a lot of skills and a lot of knowledge and had lots of experiences in a very short amount of time, which is what happens when the outer planets make aspects to natal planets. But I did reach that point of being so extremely Neptunian, so extremely world-denying, that I brought myself to a standstill by having a fucking breakdown. And then I reached that point of going, oh, you need both. You need Virgo and Pisces. You need earth and water. You need materialism and spiritualism. You can't have one without the other. The body needs the soul as much as the soul needs the body if we are to have this incarnate human existence. So I've showed how a person can swing between those opposites in and of themselves. And again, this is whether natally, by transit, or by progression, all of those things can trigger that level of experience. And whether it's between Mars and Neptune or not, or whether it's just between any Virgo and Pisces placements, you still may see some relevance to your own personal experiences. But I thought we would just take a bit of time before I finally finish this video to discuss the other side of the polarity and how that would play out in relationships. So how someone who was totally Neptune in Pisces and refused to believe they were Virgoan in any way might then respond to people in the outer environment. So let's say this is a Neptunian person who is, spiritual and mystical and totally consumed by the reality of their imagination, of their dream life, of their inner symbolic life, of their emotions, of their deep psychology, to the point where that is their reality. Spirituality is their reality, whereas the world outside, the earthy, practical realm of the senses, they experience that as being the illusion. That's the thing that isn't somehow real, that isn't somehow solid. Their dreams, they understand. Their emotions, they understand. Their artistry and their great mystical insights, they understand. But the everyday world of shopping and work and taxes and looking after your body and making sure you eat and having a proper schedule, none of these things make sense to them. They all feel somehow foreign and squalid and ugly and unattainable. And the reason why Neptunian people can dislike the earthy realm so much is because earth to man separation. When you are in the water, there is no walls or boundaries separating you from anyone else. So you can experience that sense of psychic fusion and oneness that makes you feel nourished. We talked about what happens if the earth has enough water, it produces beautiful things. So what if you just throw the earth out of the picture altogether? Then you're constantly in water. You're constantly being nourished. You're constantly being imbued with what we are told is the very stuff of life, where life originated to begin with those first single-celled amoebic organisms began to fester in that primordial swamp and produce biological life as we know it. Well, if that's where life began, why not just stay there? Why not crawl up to land and develop feet and scales? Let's just stay in the ocean where it's joyous, where I can feel that connectivity to the rest of the universe. And it's almost like as soon as the Neptunian person has to step onto dry land where they have to do those mundane, ordinary tasks, it fills them with this deep pain and fear and dread and suffering, because they are moving away from what they feel to be their source. Just as the Virgoan person sees surrendering to the divine as some kind of death of the self, the purely Neptunian person sees giving in to the necessities of the world as being cut off from the source, of being cut off from the water that makes life worthwhile. And so for this very Neptunian person, if they've denied they have any of this worldly practicality or savvy themselves, then they might be very attracted to someone who possesses all of those skills that they do not. It's almost like their ideal relationship would be to have someone who was almost their material carer. You know, they could focus 100% on, you know, painting for 5 days straight and then sleeping for 5 days straight, or, you know, going on yogic retreats or spending all their time playing video games. You know, however they satisfy that Neptunian drive to escape from the material world and immerse themselves in the other world, if they could have a partner who took care of all those material needs for them, then they wouldn't have to worry about that pesky, earthy world. Someone else could do that. They could lean into their own strengths, and that person could lean into theirs. And yet, like I said, those oppositions can be points of hatred as well as love and admiration. You know, that earthy Virgoan person, they might seem just so cold and cynical and critical and unimaginative and stuck in their rational brains. You know, they love these people because they feel they need them in some way to take care of them, and yet they're also frustrated by these Virgoan partners because they don't understand the reality that they live in. They're swimming in the water as these fantastical mermaids, and they say to their Virgoan partner, come on, jump in with me, the water's fine, I want you to experience this numinous fairy reality that I'm experiencing. And the Virgo's like, no, I'm fine, thanks. I'm fine here being a separate individual. I don't need to go into the water. I'm okay with what I'm doing. Personally, if I was being honest, I think you're a bit mad and irrational and insane, but, you know, each to their own. So when we have those attractions built from oppositions where we've denied that other side of ourselves, inevitably we might find ourselves in situations with partners who then deny us and our own validity. And the only way we can avoid that situation is by taking ownership of what we've rejected, of finding the point of balance and synthesis between those apparently separate extremes. Anyway, I'm going to stop there. If you want to get in contact with me, you can email me at thestarsunraveled@outlook.com. You can follow me on Instagram at astrologyandunderwear, and you can support me on Patreon at www.patreon.com/thestarsunraveled. Please leave any comments that you like about your own experiences. I would love to hear about your own oppositions or experience of this as a transit, a progression, or a natal aspect, or indeed any oppositions you might have, especially those between Virgo and Pisces. Like, share, and subscribe helps me to bolster the views on this channel so that I can do more of it and actually feel that this is a worthwhile usage of my time. And until then,